Hello and welcome. Today's conversation will be a special live recording of Art from the Outside featuring Will Palley and Amitha Raman, co-chairs of the Museum of Modern Art's Young Patrons Council and hosts of the podcast Art from the Outside, in conversation with collector Jeffrey Liu. Jeffrey Liu is a co-founder of Still Life and Young Patron Council Chair at the Rockbund Art Museum. Jeffrey is the co-founder, communications director, and program curator of Still Life, where he leverages his NYC and East Asian experiences to lead collaborative, cross-cultural art programming. As chair of the Young Patron Council at Shanghai's Rockbund Art Museum, he deepens his global art engagement, supporting artists, collectors, and institutions. Will Palley is the co-founder of Art from the Outside, a podcast for anyone who wants an outside look at the art world. Will is a co-chair of MoMA's Young Patrons and sits on MoMA's Media and Performance Acquisitions Committee. He is also a member of Art 21's Contemporary Council. He is committed to supporting queer and female artists with an eye towards the global South. Will received a BA in Art History from Princeton University and is completing an MA in Art History at Hunter College. He currently leads Global Marketing Insights at Meta. Amitha Raman is the founder of Amitha, a line of art-inspired luxury accessories, and co-host of Art from the Outside podcast. Amitha has been a trustee of the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture since 2020 and currently serves as vice chair on the Skowhegan Council. In addition, Amitha is co-chair of MoMA's Young Patrons Council and a member of MoMA's Black Arts Council. She is committed to supporting artists of color and female-identifying artists. Amitha received a degree in marketing communication with a minor in entrepreneurial studies from Emerson College. Thank you for being here today, and with that, I will turn it over to Will.
Is this on? It's on. Welcome, everyone. Zoe, thank you for the warm introduction. Feels like the first day of fall almost, and so we're very excited to usher in the season by talking to someone who we really admire, who's a great collector. But I guess for some of you who aren't as familiar with Art from the Outside, Art from the Outside is a podcast that Amitha and I launched in 2020, and something that you'll learn about us, or certainly something that we like to talk about, is that we are self-confessed art nerds. For us, and I think for many of you here and many in the art world at large, the arts is sort of an invitation to journey, it's an invitation to learn, it's an invitation to discover. And for us, when we started Art from the Outside, it was really an opportunity to pursue that more structurally, and selfishly, I would suppose, get to meet and talk with people who really inspired us. So it's been a phenomenal project, and we're very grateful, actually, to all of the people who have been so generous with their time in chatting to us. And I think we're very grateful today. So I'll turn it over to you, Amitha.
Yeah, just to give a little bit of background, Jeffrey and I actually met last spring when he invited me to tour a still life group exhibition he organized. And as we were chatting during the walkthrough, I was really blown away by his strong curatorial vision and deep commitment to supporting emerging artists. So when we had this opportunity to interview a young collector about navigating the art world, the art market, and building a great collection, naturally, Jeffrey was the perfect guest. So Jeffrey, we're so thrilled to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. I'm excited to, I'm excited to be here. And I've been listening to the podcast for the past few weeks, and it's fantastic. Everyone should go listen to it. And I feel like I've been just living in your world, so it's great to be in conversation with you guys now.
Well, thank you for that plug. To kick off the conversation, I'd love for you to share a bit of your personal background. Can you tell us about where you grew up, and if you can recall a specific artwork that inspired you to pursue the arts?
Yeah, well, I'm very grateful that my parents has always brought me very in close proximity with art. Growing up, my parents has been collecting since 1993, so I was born in 2000, and they really had a strong collection ever since. But I would say I wasn't really feverish about art from the beginning. I think I gained access into the art world through my passion for writing. And that really began when I came to high school in Connecticut. And I just was enamored with a pop star, Lorde, and her melodrama album. And that kind of gave inspiration for me in terms of writing, and also allowed me to look at art differently through a more abstract and creative, out-of-box way, I would say. And yeah, so that kind of took me onto the journey of studying art history at NYU, and continue kind of being obsessed with how the creative process works.
Oh, I was going to say it's funny that we all have that journey of what leads us into the arts, both as someone who is interested in it from a sort of a subject matter perspective, and then also how you move into collecting. So taking that role sort of more formally, and I really love what you say about that sort of unraveling of the journey, because I think that's certainly something that for Amitha and me is also sort of how we got to where we are today.
Yeah, and I mean, I think also Pamela Kramlich and Cesar, who your past guest was saying that they got into art through dance and choreograph. So I think for me, it's really interesting to think about art in relation to other culture industries like fashion and literature. So yeah.
Well, Jeffrey, you mentioned your family collection. So I really enjoyed the recent Art News profile on you and your father, and was really interested to learn that, as you mentioned, he began collecting in 1993 with a focus on documenting how oil painting developed in China. And today, he's considered one of the most respected collectors in the Chinese art world. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about his collecting journey, and specifically his research focus, because there are some pretty surprising discoveries that have come out of that research.
Yeah, so I guess just for some context that you're saying, my father collects mainly Chinese art, and we have a focus on how oil painting developed in China, starting with the Tianlong dynasty. And we began with Giuseppe Castiglione, who's an Italian missionary and brought oil painting to the courts of the Tianlong dynasty, and then kind of move on to the 20th century and document kind of the changing landscape, both politically and also economically, of China. And one, I guess, controversial find of my father in terms of research is that my parents are really obsessed with maps, and in 2001, I think my father bought this ancient map from a Shanghai dealer, and after some research, he thinks that this map is actually a copy of a map from the year 1418, and this map would, well, I guess the map itself has China and Europe obviously on it, but also it maps out America. So this would be a few decades before Columbus finds America, and my dad would argue that this map indicates how it might have helped Columbus also locate America. And it was very controversial, and a lot of scholars agreed and others disagreed. And I guess to combat that, my dad wrote a book. He was like, I'm going to gather all my research and the different perspectives and put it into a narrative. And I think that really sums up my parents' ethos in terms of doing a lot of research and, similar with me, enamored by writing and how to communicate art through a personal and emotional angle, and also obviously through the research. And he actually also wrote a book about his collection and is revising that right now and is working on a new book. So, yeah.
And how would you say, I mean, given your father's experience, how has that really shaped your approach to collection building?
Well, I guess he's always given me like 3 advice. The first one is to collect really patiently. He's always mentioned how collecting is a lifetime journey. It's about the process of researching about an artist, but also what happens after you collect the piece and bring it to your collection. I think it's such a privilege, and you have a lot of responsibility to the artwork as well and to the artist. So I do a lot of market research, just logistically figuring out who should I buy from, where I should buy from, and if the price is something that I think is fair. And then I guess that leads to the second part of research for me, which is artist research. And my dad always says, try to get the best piece of art from the artist at that moment. And in order to do so, you need to really look at the artist's entire practice, maybe through catalogs, through going to shows, and really, I think the most important is to talk to the artist and visit the studio, right? And in order to do so, in order to gain access, most of the time, you might need to just buy work that will take you to the next step and also support the artist in any initiative that they are embarking on. So collecting in depth, I guess, is also part of the second advice my dad gives me in order to get to know the artist and also to gain access. And the final advice is just to be in conversation with people, with tastemakers of our generation. And that relates to patronage. I think with patronage, the most important thing is that I'm in conversation with curators and being able to be in conversation with people who support the art similarly. And so I think those are my 3 advices that I've got from my dad.
Will, I'd love for you to weigh in as well, because I've actually had the pleasure of meeting your wonderful parents and know that you've grown up in a collecting family. So can you share some of the process or the factors that you consider when you're building your collection?
I think, I've been very lucky in having parents who have been very supportive of the arts, both in terms of collectors and also as supporters. I was very pleased, actually, proud that my mother was awarded an OBE earlier this year for services to the arts and education in the UK. So I've always, I think, been quite lucky in that regard. What I've seen from my parents is their collection focuses on 2 threads. One is modern British and then sort of contemporary or modern American. And I think that there's a lot of good practices that I've learned from them. One is treating galleries with respect, really supporting cultural institutions, and 3, like you say, doing your research. And so how that translates into my own collecting practices is, for me as a queer person who moved to the US as a teenager, the arts is really an extension of my identity. And so that translates into sort of the areas of interest that I have, which is why, as Zoe mentioned, for me, it's really important to support queer and female artists. So, I think that for me, that's important. And similarly, do your research. I think that a lot of us, or certainly for me, as I said at the beginning, art is really an invitation to journey and to learn. And that's part of the joy of collecting too, for me, is getting to know curators, getting to know new regions, getting to know new ideas. And that's why actually the Global South has been so important for me, because I think that as we consider how the world is changing, how sort of power structures are changing, and where there are other forms of great art. For me, it's been really rewarding to spend time in South America, really getting to know Brazil, Peru, that part of the world, because there's so much there. So, yeah.
Can you talk about, for listeners who, like me, did not grow up in a collecting family, can you talk about some of the go-to sources that you use to discover new artists? Are there, people that you consult, publications? To steal a term from another past collector we interviewed, Pamela Joyner, what is your stew of influences that inform your collecting strategy?
That's a good question. I think there are I'm very fortunate to know some amazing curators. I see Carmen Hermo in the audience today, who's a very talented curator who'll be starting at the MFA in Boston. I think you really have to build good relationships with great curators because you can learn from them. I think building good relationships from great gallerists. I see a couple gallerists I know here in the audience today, and building relationships with people who you trust, who can, teach you. I think of Ryan Lee Gallery. I think of Nature Mort. I really love Marion Goodman Gallery. These are people who are doing their research, and when you spend time getting to know these galleries, that's a great way to learn more about artists. And then for me, I'll travel anywhere for art. I love to go to biennials all over the world, Sao Paulo Biennial, Baltic Triennial, Venice Biennial. I always say for anyone who is really interested in the arts, I think it's an imperative to travel, because when you see biennials, you're seeing the art of today. You're seeing artists that aren't as well known perhaps, and that teaches you a lot about not only what's happening in the world, but then also helps you identify artists that you might be interested in spending time with in terms of bringing them into your collection.
Yeah, I mean, I just graduated from NYU, so I'm just getting into being able to travel freely. And I was at the Venice Finale recently, and like you're saying, it's so great to see curators kind of gather all the information, especially now with like social media and everything, and how how active the art world is. There's so much information to go through. So for me, I think, like you're saying, the channels that you engage with art is so important. So, for example, with Still Life, I get the privilege of working with a lot of fantastic people like Stephen from the Here and There Collective, and they have, I think, a partnership with Philips right now highlighting young artists through putting them in conversation with more established artists. So I think looking to people who are doing incredible things like that is part of what how I learn about new artists. And also talking to artists is so important for me because I think artists all have their communities and their fellow creatives that they take inspiration from, and it's incredible to kind of get that knowledge from them as well.
And if I might just add, it's funny. A lot of people say, "How do you collect?" And what is their strategy? And they say, "Look with your eyes, not your ears." I think that's true. For me, it's do your research. Because not only is that going to be useful in terms of building a collection that's going to be meaningful, in terms of sort of the impact that it has on sort of the future and building a collection of works that are going to sort of land in art history, but also doing your research is the fun part, I think.
Exactly.
That's the best part of collecting, is getting to do your research.
Well, I also think that as a result, you have a lot more conviction around the artworks that you bring into the collection. So, as trends fluctuate and things change over time, hopefully you're still happy with the acquisitions that you made because you've done a lot of research. And Jeffrey, I'm so happy that you brought up other artists, because I think that that's such a valuable resource to tap into. And people use the term artist. It's really shaped how I think about certain artist practice. When I hear kind of the tea on who's actually behaving well among their artist peers too.
I mean, it's also honestly one of the ways that I think about acquiring artists' work as well, because I love to kind of see who the artist is in conversation with, and what their community looks like, and what kind of and how it relates back to their artwork. I think being an artist, you're kind of living in the world that you're creating, and you want to constantly be thinking about creative things. And I guess that's also why I'm so obsessed with like writing, because that's a way for me to digest the creative process, and also a way for me to understand how I am so obsessed with how the creative process works. So it's a privilege to be in conversation with artists.
And I think also to the point about being in conversation with artists, there is a degree to which artists are networked. So I'll give you an example. For me, 2 years ago, I bought a work by Palley, who is currently sort of on the Met Rooftop Commission. And then I learned that his partner was Alvaro Urbano, who I subsequently bought a work by, or a couple works now, I think. And subsequently it turned out that Alvaro is now having a solo presentation at the Sculpture Center. Or another example, recently, a couple years ago, I bought a work by Kiki Smith. And then doing my research, I learned that she was very close with David Wojnarowicz. So as you think about how to build a collection, I think, that's cohesive, thinking about who the artists are, talking to the artists about who their friends or peers are can be very helpful, I think, in getting to where you want to be.
It's one of the reasons why I love being involved with Skowhegan, because of these amazing intergenerational relationships that develop between the participants who come to campus and these amazing artists that come as visiting faculty members. There's some really special relationships that develop and go beyond just the 9 weeks that people spend on campus. But I want to ask both of you, as you look to your target acquisition list, what are the gaps that you're looking to fill?
Well, my parents collect both like established artists and emerging, so I guess I'll tackle that question from both sides. In terms of emerging artists, we're really looking at how to make conversation in terms of my personal experience to my parents' generation. So for me, I grew up in Beijing, but I received my education in America and now live in New York, and people call that like the Asian diaspora. And I think we're looking for those kind of artists who have those experiences. And more specifically, I'm very interested in how ink as a medium is related to contemporary art. So for still life, we actually collaborate with two artists. One of them is Rinlight Pan, the other one is Xingzi Gu. And Rinlight Pan uses ink as, I guess, the foundation for a photographic process. She's able to kind of capture photographs onto the canvas through ink, and then Xingzi Gu takes ink as a inspiration for her oil painting. So because ink is such a historically Chinese medium, and it's not discussed a lot in the contemporary art world, I think it's a great way to almost document this identity of the Asian diaspora by inviting ink in conversation with contemporary mediums.
And, I think it's a question that, to be very frank, when you have limited resources, which almost everyone does, you have to be strategic about how you think of building a collection. And it makes me think about an interview Amitha and I did with Pamela Joyner, who, for me, the collection that she's built, I have deep admiration for. And she said she plans 3 years in advance. She builds a list of sort of artists or artworks that she wants to add to the collection and does sort of an allocation. And I imagine that's sort of the order shifts based on sort of prices, availability, et cetera, But I definitely think that as you think about building sort of a holistic collection, there's something to be said for mapping out parameters, which holes do you want to fill, et cetera. So for me, the way that I think about that is expanding. Having traveled so much, I say that New York is fantastic. It's one of the richest cultural hubs in the world. At the same time, it is quite regional. And if you do want to build a collection that embodies a certain set of ideals, if you do want to build a familiarity with the global south as I do, it takes, you need to put in the effort to travel and be in region. And so for me, that's why I spent so much time in Brazil, getting to know sort of the Brazilian artistic discourse. And, first, it was actually Tadaskia, who currently now has a massive solo presentation at the MoMA. I saw her work 2 years ago, and it was because I was in region that I was able to sort of, I don't want to be, I'll put it this way, it certainly was, it's a very different price now than what it was when I bought it. So in terms of my collecting strategy, it's travel. It's spend time in region. And so the regions that I'm really interested in now are continuing to spend more time in South America. And then I think also what's a region that I'll be focusing on in 2025 is starting to look at parts of Asia. India is very interesting to me. The Philippines is very interesting, but really reinforcing. And I think the three of us all share that. Is I think it's important to have a sense of cohesion. For me, for instance, again, with limited resources, I put sort of parameters around my collection, and that's why, for instance, one, focusing on queer and female artists, and then two, at this point in my collecting career, I don't know enough about photography. I want to be well-researched. I want to be, it's important for me to be thoughtful, and because I don't know enough about photography, I just don't collect photography. It's not a comment on the medium. It's more a reflection of sort of the resources I have, the knowledge that I have, and trying to be very specific about how the collection grows.
Are there any specific artists or bodies of work that you're particularly excited about pursuing?
Well, Amitha knows this. In terms of the established artist side, I'm fascinated by Robert Rauschenberg because of his experimental mentality and also the community that he has around him, and also the aesthetics is it's very much up my alley. But not a lot of people know that he's also one of the first artists to stage an exhibition in China in like the 1970s. He had the Rocky series, which is an acronym for Rauschenberg Overseas Culture Exchange, and essentially Rauschenberg uses art as a medium to connect to different cultures, and he was in Brazil and in Tibet, in Thailand, and also in China. And I was reading how the show in Beijing drew in like 300,000 people, and a lot of established artists of the Chinese contemporary art world also references Rauschenberg a lot. So I'm looking at these artists who are also outside of maybe my parents' worldview, and because of my education, I'm able to get to know them a bit more and really introduce them to the collection, which curatorially is also very interesting.
I mean, I'm curious, Amitha, what your answer would be, but I'll say for myself, there are sort of aspirational works. You know, people always say, oh, if you could steal a work, what would it be? Absolutely Eva Hesse, but then, you know, to the point about Brazil, there's a phenomenal artist, Leon Nielsen, who I sort of describe as, and I'm sure this wouldn't be a nice thing for some people to hear, but he's sort of, in my mind, I read him as the Brazilian David Wanarovich, incredibly talented artist who passed away of, I believe, AIDS-related complications. But then another artist that I would like to continue collecting is the artist Delcy Morelos. You know, I bought a work of hers from Marion Goodman earlier this year, incredibly poetic, artist who works in sort of natural materials, paint, etc. And that for me is an artist, she's from Colombia, and that certainly for me is an artist that I would like to collect further in depth.
Well, I'm obsessed with David Wojnarowicz as well. He is an incredible writer too. Like, I found out about his work through his writing actually, and that I guess, yeah, I need to learn more.
Yeah, he's great. And I'll also say the other sort of area of the collection that I'd like to expand into is multimedia and video. I bought my first, it was sort of a being involved with MoMA, one to plug for everyone. I think supporting museums, joining patron groups has been, I think, for all of us, one of the most rewarding experiences. And I mean that in a selfish way. You know, that's how I've learned a lot about artists, learned a lot about galleries, and that's helped me. And when I joined MoMA's Media and Performance Acquisition Committee, that gave me the push to start to say, okay, this is a format that I don't think that I can live with. And now I bought my first video work. It's a work by Gretchen Bender, who I believe passed away. I mean, she's not with us today, but that was the first time that I bought a multimedia work, and that's fun. So I think that's an area as well that I'd like to push the collection into.
Well, since we're on the topic of museum patronage, Jeffrey, as was mentioned in the introduction, you are the chair of the Rockland Art Museum's Young Patrons Group. Can you talk about why museum patronage is important to you specifically, or personally, and also why other young collectors should consider building relationships with institutions?
Yeah, well, like Will was saying, I think it's just such a privilege to be in conversation with people who are curating and organizing shows, and I take it as an opportunity just to educate myself. And for Rockland specifically, the Young Patron Council, we think of it as a think tank, as a possibility to really learn with Extru Noel. And I guess a little bit about Extru Noel. They were at the Guggenheim before, and I think it's incredibly admirable that they went back to Shanghai and really decided to focus on building knowledge production in China, because it's I think it's a very singular mission that the Rockland Art Museum is embarking on, and they're showing very challenging and rigorous work, and being able to support that as a Chinese person also means a lot. So I guess for patronage too, I would like to highlight regions, like you're saying, through supporting institutions that are advocating for these narratives. And for young collectors, I think it's a great way to do research and educate yourself. And I think, yeah, it's also just, it's a lot of fun. We went up to upstate yesterday with the Young Patron Council, and we visited DIA and Magazino and all of these institutions with X, and every time X the curator. Will mentioned that X is, it's good to remind people, X the curator, not X the museum in Beijing. And yeah, so hearing X talk about art is just fantastic. The way that they build context and history, narrative within each work is something that is just like awe-inspiring. So yeah, I guess, I don't know what Will has to say about that as well.
Well, I would say it's so interesting. I think one of the things that many questions we get from gallerists, from journalists, etc., is, this question of, well, there needs to be more collectors and supporters entering the art market, whether that be as supporting cultural institutions, whether that be as sort of purchasers/collectors. And I think that one of the challenges or issues that I see is the art market and the art world is incredibly opaque. It's very difficult to understand how it works. And a friend came around recently, and she's, she works, I think, at McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group, and so she's, financially in somewhat of a favorable position. And she said to me, oh, I really want to get involved in the arts, but all I see is, auction prices of this amount of money and, this mega gallery selling works for millions of dollars, and the Met Museum asking for $5,000. And I said to her, that's absolutely one part of the arts ecosystem that has a role to play. But if you're interested in entering the market, young patron groups are the best way to do that. I mean, that was how I, even though I grew up, certainly my parents were involved in the arts and still are, they stayed in London, I'm based here in New York, and I sort of decided to pursue this journey independently. And it was through MoMA that I was able to get to know the arts and get to know galleries like, Rachel Uffner. There's some great galleries that are more, have great programming, like Dinner Gallery, for instance. And, you can participate in the market for, under $5,000. And, patron groups, for people who aren't familiar, are immensely valuable in giving you that knowledge and those set of relationships to say, okay, I've made a little bit of, I'm in a position where I can, participate in the art market. I'd like to buy some art. These are the sort of galleries that are worth talking to. These are the curators that I can learn from, and the introductions that you can make. So, it's selfishly in some regards, I'm like, maybe I shouldn't say this, but a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to go and do a master's that's more professionally oriented, maybe, I don't know what kind of organization. I'm like, just join a young patron group, save yourself that time expense, join a museum patron group and let them educate you, because you're hearing sort of proverbially from the horse's mouth, and you'll get the introductions that are going to be helpful in the education that you need to build a long-lasting career and experience in the art world.
Exactly. Cool.
Well, actually, I was going to ask, I think that we all, obviously we're all chairs of young patrons groups, so we're very bought into the importance of museums, but what do you think museums can do to better cultivate the next generation of supporters? Question for Jeffrey, and then Will, as you were quoted in the New York Times on this very topic, I'd love for you to weigh in as well after Jeffrey.
Well, I guess just personally, like I was saying, I got interested in art, obviously thankful to my family, but also through this personal angle of other industries. And I think museums can be very open to different types of collaborations. I mean, for example, Alaya, the fashion brand, just did a wonderful runway show at the Guggenheim, and exactly, and the clothes were kind of like structurally referencing Guggenheim's architecture as well. And I think with Alaya, obviously you're bringing in a very different crowd of people, and then what happens next is I think it's important for museums and institutions to think about what you do with this exposure. And going back to like education, I think it's important for institutions and museums to think about how to relay their narrative and help educate the importance of museum patronage and also just museums in general, how it functions in a society and what it should be doing in relation to the community. And yeah, I think these are these are things that I'm thinking about in terms of how museums can really help introduce new patrons. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more, and I think to build off that, there are so many other societal issues that are important to support, and cultural institutions in the arts sector has, I'm sorry to say it, not done a good enough job of explaining why it matters. Why does the art matter? Why do the arts matter? Because I think we all know that, but as you think about sort of the next generation of people who are here, there are so many other sort of pressing issues, and the arts, I think, and certainly cultural institutions have, and you're talking, as someone who loves cultural institutions, have been a bit complacent in really making a case for why arts and culture matters. That plus I think that, cultural institutions and museums move incredibly slowly. They're, incredibly opaque. They feel like sort of black holes of money. You give a donation, who knows what it's going to, and I think cultural institutions and museums need to do a much better job of being transparent with how their budgets are allocated. They need to do a much better job of showing the impact that they make, and I think that they just need to be a lot more welcoming, because, this is what you read in the news, right, that there's this massive wealth transfer happening from boomers to millennials and Gen Z. And, there is a lot of wealth that will be transferred. And when I say wealth, that also means the ability to support nonprofits. And if, millennials and Gen Z, we're millennials, Gen Z, if you're not aware and engaged with cultural institutions, it's not going to change. So I think the clock is ticking, and museums really need to work harder and faster to show why the arts matter, to be more transparent, and to show the impact that they themselves are having on the world today.
Yeah, and I would just like to add to that point too. I think when we were up at DIA yesterday, the curator was talking about how the collection has changed, or the presentation changed a lot to highlight people of color and female artists. And I think institutions need to think about narratives that would also connect with the younger generation and put up shows that make sense with what is happening in society, and also what gets the next generation to be able to support and make it personal too. Yeah.
I also think that just creating better experiences for a walkthrough, or like adding a hospitality element that's makes it a little bit more attractive to get people to come out to, say the Brooklyn Museum for a tour. You find a really amazing curator like Carmen Ermo to do the walkthrough, but you also do a reception afterwards at, like, we've done one together at Oxalis, which was a Michelin-starred restaurant. So I'm like, how do I get friends who maybe they're sort of interested in the art, but like, what's the other carrot that we can use to kind of get them over the hump to come to the first event?
Exactly. Like, I was reading an article about radical hospitality or radical accessibility. And it's really about thinking outside of the box, and again with like these innovative collaborations. I think these are so important to be able to invite people who has, like you say, knowledge about art but don't know how to personally support or get involved. So doing these fun activities are always so important, and I love hosting them too.
Yeah, I think it's funny you say that, because what's interesting, speaking, as a millennial, is, I think the art world has been around for a longish time, and the practices that the art world has adopted, those were adopted at a different time, and the art world has stayed the same, but the world around it has changed. And so when we talk about museums, I'm sure a lot of museums are like, oh, we can't do anything social, but at the end of the day, the world has changed, and that's important. And so I think there's a real, a fundamental question for museums to tackle is like, how do you make this more social? Millennials, Gen Z, we are interested in experiences, we're interested in socialization, and I think there's just kind of this sense that, oh, well, that wasn't important, and so we shouldn't change to accommodate that. And I think that's the really a problem. Museums do need to be more flexible and more responsive to today's reality of what people want and expect.
Yeah, exactly. I think what Will is saying in terms of like being very, very responsive is so important. And I think one way institutions and museums can do that is also just investing in Gen Z leadership or younger leadership and really inviting young people to get involved. Supporting these activities that we're mentioning. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about what institutions can do to attract younger supporters, but what about galleries? What can galleries do to attract the next generation of collectors?
Well, I guess as a Gen Z, we are just starting off our career. We might not have the capacity to collect on a very rapid basis. And what is important for us as Gen Z collectors right now is really education, like I've been kind of talking about endlessly this time. But I think galleries should invest in opportunities to really communicate with young collectors and know that it will be a long-term kind of process rather than something that might be quicker with like an established collector. I think Gen Z's, especially coming out of the market that was so rapid in the past few years, Gen Z are a bit more careful and with the information that we have access to too. I think we just want to make sure that we're making the right decisions before jumping all the way in.
And I think it's interesting as well. I have unlimited things to say about this, but I think that the word that I keep on using is opacity, and I think galleries are really unwelcoming and intimidating. And I'll give you an example. I have a friend who has been quite successful working at a tech company that IPO'd. And, she didn't grow up around the arts, and she was interested in, collecting and buying work. And so many people who haven't grown up or been educated about the art world, you walk into a gallery, you might not even know that that's everything there is for sale. How do you know that? And then, okay, well, then you need to know that you have to go to the front desk, and then you have sort of a front desk person who is not hospitable, to put it the least. And then you have to ask for the price list, and then you need an email, and then, these are all these steps that people who have not grown up around the art world know. And I think that's a real problem. So starting from the moment that someone walks in the door, I was going to save this for the end, but I'll give an anecdote that recently I was in Paris. I walked into a gallery, and I know the owner quite well, but he wasn't there. And I walked in, and I liked the works on the wall, and I walked up to the person behind the desk, and I said, "Oh, I'm interested." And he was like, "None are available." And then I texted the owner, and I said, "I really like these." And he was like, "Oh yeah, there were 2 downstairs that were available." And it's that kind of nonsense and exclusivity that is really hurting the market. Because if people don't know that these are things for sale, then they're never going to participate. It was interesting. Someone said recently, everyone likes to laugh at opera gallery, for instance. Sorry, that was someone else's words, Art Newspaper Podcast words, not mine. And I totally agree. You walk into opera gallery, it's all for sale, it's easy to find the price, maybe there are wall labels. At the end of the day, there is this balance. Of course, I understand that we don't want, the art market to become, a high-end shopping mall. at the same time, the art businesses, galleries need to accept and recognize that the practices around collecting are not the same. There is a whole new audience of people who are interested in living with art and don't know how to do it. So galleries need to do a much better job of being more transparent, more welcoming, and go from there, I think.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I think one of the silver linings that came out of the pandemic and not being able to visit art fairs in person was the transparency. And I can speak for myself that I was actually able to accelerate my buying during that time. So I was like, oh, wow, like, you know, you don't have to do this dance around, asking the price, which is silly because it's obviously an important factor to consider when you're making an acquisition. So before we head it over to the audience, I wonder if you guys could each share, what is one piece of advice you wish that you'd known when you first started collecting?
Well, for me, I think coming from my parents who just kind of subconsciously was influencing me with a lot of pre-existing ideas on like exclusivity and how galleries work. In a way, I wish I was told to just forget about everything I know and be more open to ideas and ask questions. I think that's a part of it as well. Like a lot of galleries or the art world don't really encourage questions in a sense. And there's a lot of artworks that kind of passed me by just because I felt like it was kind of inaccessible to me and I wasn't able to really dig in with my personal questions and do some research. And now I'm looking back, I'm like, I wish I took another look. And so I think just forgetting about like what I thought about how like the hierarchy of the art world works and who I should buy from, and really just opening my eyes to different types of gallerists, artists, and institutions is really important.
I have 2 or maybe 2.5. One, look at works sold by nonprofits. They have great relationships with artists, and so you can get really, really excellent works, and often at reasonable prices. 2, don't be afraid to start with a print. The first artwork I ever bought was a Julie Meritou print from a studio in a school, which is Agnes Gunn's nonprofit. I got it when I got my first job at Google and had a little bit of my own money. And it's one of the things I love most. It's probably also the thing that's not that I would ever sell it, but the work that's appreciated the most in my collection. And then the final thing is ask for a discount. To the point about opacity, the first time I ever bought a work from a gallery, which was after I bought that Julie work, I didn't know you're supposed to ask for a discount. So that was 10% that I just got, because I didn't ask, I didn't get it. And that also goes back to this theme about there's so much opacity and codedness. Fortunately, it was not a substantial amount of money, but if it were 10 times the price, then that would have been a lot of money that I would have been, the gallery wouldn't have disclosed that I was entitled to, and that would have burnt the relationship. So, to reiterate, cultural institutions, what they're selling, don't be afraid of prints. And when you work with a gallery, ask for a discount, because they're not always going to offer it to you, even though they should.
Okay, well, I think with that, we should open up questions to the audience. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and Zoe will run a mic over to you. Yes, but we are recording this for our podcast, so I want to get your amazing question.
Thank you. Now, I have many questions, but the thing that came to mind when you were talking about various new things that you're collecting, can you comment at all about the new onset of AI in art?
Well, I've been having this conversation this week actually with some friends, and there's this great New Yorker article that came out last week written by Ted Chiang, and it specifically talks about AI in art. And its main argument is how AI doesn't allow you to make these really subconscious and you're not in control of every decision when you're making art through AI, and in the creative process. Also, personally for me, when it comes to writing, like I get obsessed with every word that I choose, and want to make sure that it's perfectly right for the emotion that I want to convey as a writer. And yeah, so I guess like with AI, as a technology, it's not made to make art, it's made to be more efficient and make your life easier. But I think AI as a concept and as a structure could be interesting for artists to react with. So I do think that a lot of, like, for example, I think Wang Shui, a contemporary artist that works with like aluminum material in a very fluid way. Anyways, his images are made from AI, and they kind of represent how he thinks about how image evolves and the parameters of image creation. So yeah, I guess AI can be part of a creative process, but it's hard to make it the focus from what I understand.
And I agree, and I think, my perspective is that AI is here and it's here to stay. You can think about artists like Ian Cheng, who've been working with AI for a while. I think most recently about, the Brian Eno documentary that used AI as well. So it's here, and I think it's absolutely going to be a part of art. I wish I knew what exactly that means and sort of what I would be buying, or if I were a curator, what I would be looking at, but I think it's absolutely here to stay, and I think it's a great question that we should all be thinking about moving forward.
Great. Looks like we have a question right here.
How do young artists, or old artists, what's the best way to get into the art market today?
For artists, I think, well, I guess going back to community, it's really important for an artist to be in conversations with fellow artists, but also curators, and through joining like educational organizations, like I guess being part of like nonprofits, like going to events,
even.
residencies, exactly. Yeah, I guess, and like we had a conversation around residencies and how important it is just to apply, even though you might not be getting in the first time. At least your portfolio is with the residency, and they can kind of see how you grow as well as an artist. So I think just being dedicated and involved in the art world is, and yeah, you'll reap the results.
And you have to keep on trying. We spoke with a great artist, Guadalupe Maravilla. We interviewed him on the podcast, and he has been so successful. And he was saying, I got so many rejections, residencies, galleries, you name it, he got rejected. And, he was like, you just need to keep on trying.
Well, I thought you were going to reference Jeffrey Gibson, because he has a very famous story about how after spending 20 years in New York trying to make it as an artist, he actually kind of gave up on that dream and moved up to Hudson. And as we all know, he represented the US pavilion at the Venice Biennial, most recently. So it just goes to show that, you have to keep on going and charting your own path, and, hopefully it will resonate with people. Let's see, we have one more question over here.
Thanks. Whoa. Hi. Y'all are amazing. I'm Carmen. I was referenced. So grateful to be in community. Another art nerd. Yeah, Jeffrey Gibson, Marilyn Minter, they've all shouted you out for the research you do on these podcasts, right? These are artists who hear from a lot of people, and they always give you props for the depth. So I always love to shout that out. And I want to just kind of mention, too, the two-way streetness of what you're speaking about younger generations supporting museums and artists, because speaking from the curatorial perspective, when I was at the Guggenheim, which is where I met Will, that was an acquisition committee supported by emerging younger collectors and people interested in art, even people who weren't collectors themselves. And because of that work, this was like 2015, 2016, the Guggenheim was acquiring Jenny C. Jones, Jamie and Giuliano Villani, Kevin Beasley, at a time where these other acquisition committees were kind of at large, but, these artists for various reasons wouldn't qualify for that funding source because they were emerging, so these institutional, like you're saying, kind of barriers that need to be broken down. I've always appreciated the collectors and supporters who come through because you give voice to the curator saying like, hey, it's not just me who thinks this artist is great. It was this whole group of people who left the studio like electrified, and then we voted, and so there's a lot of layers to that support that goes unseen that I just want to shout out. And yeah, that's museums, that's public spaces, etc. But I was wondering if you could speak about, what it feels like to have art in your home, right? And how it feels to live with art, because I feel like that feeling and that passion comes through in your podcast so much. And I'm just curious if all three of you could, maybe spark a few words about what it really feels like to wake up with artists in your home.
Jeffrey, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, well, I recently acquired a big piece by Real Life Pan that's now in my bedroom, and every day when I wake up, I look at the piece, and it's a self-portrait of the artist, and it reminds me of the special relationship that I have with the artist, which I'm so grateful for, and so I guess they are just anecdotes and memories that I also associate with the artwork that's so important, and it just makes home feel like home, and and it's beautiful to look at too.
It's for me an absolute joy and a privilege and a pleasure. It's worth every dollar, candidly. But I think about it as living with friends, and I'll give you two examples. One is, as I mentioned, I bought a work by Pedro Halilai, and I hosted a dinner for his husband Alvaro for his Sculpture Center exhibition. And Patrick came, and there was a work up on the wall, and he said, "Can I touch it?" And I was like, "Of course you can touch it. It's yours. You made it." And he took it down, and he showed me a part of it, and he was like, "Well, actually, if you look at the work this way, it's actually this." And there was a whole part of the work I never would have noticed. So getting to live with artists, and then recently I just acquired it's a commission by the artist Oren Pignasi, who has a show coming up at Lehman Morpin, and he came round and we were talking about the commission. It's going to go in my garden, and it's this sense of getting to live with friends, getting to live with people who bring you joy. And I think of myself as custodian isn't the right word, but I always say to artists, which I believe earnestly, I say to them, thank you for letting me live with your work and letting me take care of it, because it is a gift, and I feel immensely grateful and joyful to get to spend time with them. And yeah, like I said, not to be crass, but we are at an art fair worth every dollar. Truly, truly, truly.
Well, I think that is an excellent note to end the conversation. So thank you so much for spending a part of your afternoon with us.